watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. From Toronto, Ontario, I'm Catherine Bullock. Assalamu alaikum and greetings of peace. Later on in the show, we will talk to someone who has been watching the Climate Change Summit closely to find out what happens next. But first, some news headlines. Standing Committee discusses legislation on forced labour. Mohamed Lachemi named top 50 influential Torontonians. Religious diversity increasing in far north Canada. Indonesia's rescue mission looks for Quake survivors. And now the details. A meeting was held by the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development yesterday to discuss amendments to Bill S-211 to tackle forced labour. The committee heard from advocacy groups demanding that Canada adopt stricter legislation to ban imports from East Turkestan. The National Council of Canadian Muslims offered targeted amendments. Dolkun Issa, president of the World's Uyghur Congress, says the tough barriers imposed by the United States on imports from China have led to an increase in Chinese imports to Canada. In a letter to the Canadian MPs, the Ottawa-based Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project calls the current legislation, quote, very weak. Professor Mohamed Lachemi, President and Vice-Chancellor of Toronto Metropolitan University, has been named among the top 50 influential Torontonians this year. Lachemi is an internationally recognized researcher. He has been at the forefront of reconciliation by rebranding Toronto Metropolitan University, which was previously known as Ryerson University. Lachemi is an accomplished academic administrator who led 45,000 students through the pandemic. He has also opened Canada's newest medical school. Lachemi has a background in civil engineering. He joined Toronto Metropolitan University as a professor of civil engineering in 1998. Religious diversity in the far northern territories of Canada is increasing, report a media source. Lutheran, Anglican, Catholic, and Russian Orthodox congregations have been there for more than 100 years. They are being joined now by other Christian denominations like Jehovah's Witnesses and non-Christian faiths like Muslims and Sikhs. Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories is rebuilding its mosque. The second most northerly mosque in the world is in Inuvik in the Northwest Territories. Mia Bennett, a University of Washington geography professor who specializes in Arctic studies, says houses of worship help people in these otherwise isolated areas gather together in community. Rescuers search for survivors buried under rubble after an earthquake on Indonesia's main island of Java killed 162 people. Hundreds were injured, leaving more trapped in collapsed buildings. Rescue efforts tried to find any survivors still under debris in areas made hard to reach in the aftermath of the quake. The epicenter of the shallow 5.6 magnitude quake on Monday was near the town Cianjur in West Java, which is the most populous province in Indonesia. Most of the victims were killed as buildings collapsed, triggering landslides. President Joko Widodo visited the area, offering compensation for victims. And that's it for the news. The Swedish environmental activist Greta Thunberg boycotted COP27 summit in Egypt, but others, especially from countries severely impacted, attended, hoping to bring about positive change. To talk to us about his assessment of the summit, we are joined by Mohamed Kamel, Egyptian-Canadian Coalition for Democracy. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi, Sister Katie, and welcome. I appreciate to be on the show as well.
It's our pleasure to have you. The environmental activists were using the word greenwashing, and your organization also put out a press release calling the conference greenwashing, and we did interview someone from your organization, Ihab Lotayef, last week. Tell us about this. Do you still assess that that's what happened?
That's exactly what happened, because what we saw from the conference during the period is the people just coming there from everywhere. Presidents, kings, and prime ministers and ministers and all level of government going there to Egypt, where we see exactly very clear the abuse of the human rights that taking place for almost 10 years now, without any remorse for the people that has been assassinated and target killed, that people been imprisoned, people have been executed for no justice, no due process on the judicial system, and all the stuff happening in Egypt until now. And even during the conference, we saw that people was really calling for the release of Egyptian in prison. They put Al Fattah as an icon for this, but behind him, 60,000 prisoner, and there's nothing changing in Egypt. And even if they release one person, they just arrest hundreds. And we knew that journalists that they've been denied access to internet, some of them access to their site, access to communication. Now we knew that the United Nations is investigating even the police activity. And during the summit where Egyptian government has promised, they never fulfilled their promises in anything anyway. They have promised to leave the United Nations people free. Germany itself has been accused Egypt of even spying on their delegate. So it's all what we saw is a proof that it is a greenwash. It's not a green conference.
And we pray for their safety and want to, amplify the voices of the human rights advocates. But for the rest of the show, I'd like to just focus a little bit more on the actual issues of climate change.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of the activists were pointing out the oil and gas lobby had a great presence there. Even Egypt itself has currently exploring for new gas and oil projects, I believe. One organization counted 636 lobbyists from the oil and gas industry. So can you tell us about how we can have such presence at a climate change conference?
We have two big lobbyist groups. The biggest on the world are the arms dealer and the oil and gas. And we speak about green and speak about environment and speak about the future of the planet and the future of human being. Those people should be really striked out completely from any discussion like this. But we speak about lobbyists, we speak about money, and we know the influence of those lobbyists, and especially speaking here about the environment, we have the oil and gas companies, and they spend hundreds of millions on lobbying every single day. I'm not speaking about, because this is where they get their wealth, where is this where they get more reach, and the planet get more dry, more desert, and we have no future on the planet because of their presence. So the problem is not on us as people, the problem is on the government that really accept to deal with those lobbyists and accept their money. It's not direct money, they don't pay direct money, but their money that through, we know how it's going through election, financing the elections campaign on the Western society. We see the real democracy, supposedly, or we consider it democracy for now. And that's money that will play this. So having those lobbyists, the 600 plus, and this conference is not strange, it's not the first, and unfortunately will not be the last.
Even Canada apparently has a delegate from Enbridge on its team. So what does that tell us about Canada's commitment to the issues?
I don't believe that there is any country on the industrial countries have real commitment. They have just the propaganda commitment. Because at the end, they cannot really face the reality on the ground. The industrial countries are the most actually people that populated the environment, and that what we live right now is because of the industrial countries. The third world countries doesn't have the real tool for the pollution. They just try to react to what are the industrial countries doing. So I don't think that the Canadian government or American government or any government in the West can stand against their own interest of their economical will. And this is exactly parallel to dealing with countries that violate human rights, dealing with their own companies that violating human rights on a safe environment. Because Enbridge and all those countries, yes, they are share market in the business. They're doing a very good for business and for bringing money to the table and to the government. But what is the impact? We spoke several times. Go
But
ahead.
do you think that it's sort of like an unfortunate reality of the current times? The people are saying that because Russia has invaded Ukraine and put the Europe under sort of threat, that this is an unfortunate necessity. We wish we didn't have to, but we don't have a choice.
This is actually another wash of the reality. It's not really because of Russia. We all condemn the war in Ukraine. Nobody will accept it, and nobody accepted the war in Iraq. Nobody accepted Vietnam War before. This part of the control of those society, the big boys that just bully everything on the planet. But what has the Russia-Ukraine war to do with the oil, and what has to do with the environment? That might be a forcing us to go out from using of the oil and gas and go to the clean energy. That's not a matter of replacing the Russian oil with the American oil,
Mm.
not replacing the Russian gas with the American gas or the Gulf area gas or whatever. It's a matter of pushing us more what toward really a clean energy, but we do the opposite, not because of Russian war, but because of our own interest on the company that really put money on the government budget.
So you're sort of talking about money makes the world go round. What's the hope then? Like, what's an environmental activist to do?
Unfortunately, the only thing we can do now is continue lobbying our civil society
Mm.
to reach a day when we can elect government that put the human being, really the human will before any other interest. We have to put the future well-being of human on environment, and the human rights on environment and on all other aspects, as we start our discussion as well about the situation in Egypt and third world countries with
Mm.
under dictator and stuff like this. If we put this first before money, I think we will have a better society that defend its own people and build better future for all of us.
And somehow that's a message that's falling on deaf ears. Even in Canada, we covered on the news a survey that was conducted last week or a couple of weeks ago, where Canadian support for environmental policies is actually really low, one of the lowest in industrial countries. What do you think's wrong with the message?
It's a matter of education. We still have an issue. We need to go through a long educational process. We have to invest effort, more effort in this. We have to be sure that we can do that really and continue in this direction to educate ourselves. Yes, I'm looking forward to money come to my pocket to be able to put food on the table at the end of the day. But I have to know that in a few months from now, I will not have this food on the table even when I have money. It's not a matter of having money by supporting oil and gas companies and just not clean, really energy, but having less money with more clean energy will have a continuity, will have food on the table than just have one source of this, which is coming from oil and gas and not from clean energy.
Mm. Well, an uphill battle, but thank you for joining us to give us your assessment of what happened. Thank you.
Thank you, Katia, and thanks for all our listeners to follow us.
And thank you for watching. If you like what we do, please share, like, and subscribe. Stay safe and God bless.